This is the Closure House, where we discuss boundaries, estrangement, no contact, and the difficult thing about relationships most people avoid. I'm Jessica, I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about how to break the cycles and not repeat the patterns. So, with estranged parents, anytime we end up talking, listening to content, anything that happens, it's always the same narrative. I did the best I could with what I knew. And that has become the excuse, it's become the reason, it has become their narrative on why they created so much abuse and distance between their adult children. So many of the victims and survivors of that abuse have decided, I'm doing something different because I don't want that happening to my kids. But there is something that's happening in that process as a therapist that I'm seeing. I am seeing the same cycles being repeated, even with different behavior. And so I want to talk to you about just what that could look like. Think about all the things that you were taught growing up. Like people told you, when you get older, you will understand this. When you have your own kids, you will understand. When you have to work a job, you will understand. And then think about growing up, having kids, working a job, and being like, yo, I still don't get it. I still don't get why I had to suffer through the abuse that I went through. So I want to talk to you about like the effects of estrangement. It's not just being impacted because you've left your family behind. There is also a disconnect because you have to now approach your own inner child as well. As you start seeing your kids grow up, you start realizing the magnitude of the abuse you went through. Like, the effect that they thought that you would get, like the estranged parents and other people who were trying to convince you to continue talking to them, they thought that you would grow up and you would be like, I get it now. Now that I have a kid, I understand why my parent was so abusive to me because having kids is hard, right? A lot of us have broken the cycle and we don't put our hands on our kids and we don't abandon our kids and make them go in the room for hours. Or if they're emotionally upset, we don't just leave them there, tell them to suck it up. A lot of us try to talk to them, help build their emotional intelligence. We try to nurture them. And I think what's happening in adulthood, though, is when you start seeing this small child and you realize that what happened to you was so severe, it's like you didn't ever really understand the magnitude until you had a child. And then you can look at a kid, let's say they're 5 years old, and you can really understand everything that happened to you and how terrible it was. Like from a survivor's standpoint, when you go through something, a lot of times it's easier on the other side. Like you look at it, you're like, man, that was really hard, but you don't really get the magnitude. As you start understanding what really happened to you, it can create feelings of anger or feelings of betrayal even. It can create feelings of abandonment, especially emotionally, to understand that somebody really hurt you and they could have made a different decision. So what I see is adult children of estranged parents who are really trying to heal their own inner child, who are also trying to raise children at the same time. And that is not easy. But we want to talk about cycle breaking. When we end up on the wrong side of TikTok and we're with the estranged parents and they're talking about how they raise their kids and everything else, there is a narrative there that adult children who are estranged are entitled and they just think they're owed everything, right? I want you to know that that couldn't be further from true. Entitlement is people expecting something that they have not earned or have not worked towards. So the real entitlement is them being like, I want my kid in my life, even though I abused them. I want my kid in my life, even though I abandoned them, mistreated them, neglected them, even though they're healing their whole lives because of me. Even though they picked bad relationships, their whole lives because of what I've instilled in them and conditioned them to do. That is entitlement. So they're like, I am owed this. They want access to your kids. They want access to your life. They paid for your school. They paid for your home. They gave you money. They sacrificed their life. They fed you. They put a roof over your head. That is what I would say is entitlement. To feel like because I did all these things, I am owed this from my kid, right? So to me, estranged parents are entitled to that degree. But a lot of times they actually project that same thing on us. And they say, you are entitled because you won't talk to me. And Although that doesn't fit, I want to show you how you can still create the same cycle with your own kid, even though you're not doing any of that. If you have a kid and they have never been abused, they don't understand what you went through. They don't understand what you sacrifice because they don't work jobs and they don't have to pay bills and they just don't have that knowledge yet. So if you go out of your way to do something for your kid and then they're not appreciative or it feels like they're ungrateful, your first instinct may be to say, but I bought you a toy, but I took you shopping, but I let you do this. Like that narrative that I'm talking about right now is the same narrative later in adulthood that the estranged parents have. I want you to see how they're so different, but they can create the same outcome. Your kids, they didn't go through what you went through. And just like you didn't understand the magnitude until you actually had them, they can't even understand the magnitude when you discuss what's happening at an age appropriate way. So they don't know what they don't know. And in the process of healing, I also see parents sometimes abandon their kids emotionally because they're grieving. And in the process of grieving, it's like they're not very available or they need more sleep or, they can't do certain things. So I know that it's hard because, like, as an estranged adult child, you know that the outcome could be that your kid could leave you behind at some point. The goal is not to make them love you. It's not to buy their love. It's not to do things so that you can say, look what I did, look what you got. The real relationship with a kid is spending time together. It's how you talk to them. It's the excitement when you see them walking in a room. Like you can also heal your inner child by the way you interact with your child. But I think the issue becomes that it's hard to break cycles when you don't see the patterns. Like if you focus on everything that happened to you, it will make it so hard for you to move on. If you focus on how what happened to you made you feel, it'll be so easy to relate to your child because the goal will be to not make them feel like what you felt like. And to do that, you're going to have to break cycles. But first, you have to recognize the cycles. So that's a lot of what I'm seeing in therapy. Also, I would say be careful of the things that you do for your child that you don't want to do. Like it can really build resent. If you know you want to buy your child something expensive, so you get a second job to pay for it, and then you resent the child and you don't get to spend time with the child and that kind of thing, it would be much easier to just work through the disappointment of, you can't have this right now. Versus doing all of that and then the child have a bad day and it's like, oh my gosh, I went to work all these hours to buy this for you. And the kid doesn't understand that. So the biggest focus is, what did you feel? When you were growing up, what did you feel? Because if you can try to prevent the things you felt, then you can usually stop the behaviors. There are a million ways that you can get the same result. I think that's my biggest disappointment in the estranged parents category when they're like, I did the best I could and they did the exact same thing that happened to them. They didn't try anything different. They didn't pivot. They didn't ask for help. They didn't do anything different. They just repeated a pattern. And to me, I can't really respect that. But for us, as we're breaking the behavior patterns, we may be continuing some of the cycles as well. But if you recognize how you're making someone feel in the process, a lot of times you can stop that. So we talked about not doing for your child when you don't want to, so it doesn't build resent. And we also talked about the fact that you may have to heal more of the inner child because they are going to trigger some of the things that you thought you were over because you hadn't experienced them in this way. You hadn't experienced them from a parent perspective. And if you find yourself more mad at your parents in adulthood, because I really think that's what happens. I don't believe therapists are convincing people to leave their families behind. As a therapist, there has never been a time where I've sat down with someone and said, you should leave your family behind. I think what happens is you understand the magnitude in adulthood. You understand who kept the abuse going. You understand how the enabling parent was maybe worse than the abusive parent because they could have stopped it. And you understand what you really endured as a child and that it didn't have to be that way. And you also have to listen to a bunch of different narratives of people around you saying, but that's your mom, that's your dad, that's your cousin, that's your brother, that's your sister. And it feels like nobody's supporting the person who was the victim and the survivor. It really feels like everybody's supporting it's almost like the abuse doesn't matter to anyone else because of who people are in your life. And I think that when it comes to anybody who's a truth teller or scapegoat, I don't think you can endure not seeing the truth and not pointing it out. I don't think people want to be abused. So if you want to break the cycle, think about how you make people feel. And if you find yourself struggling with that, just think about when was the last time you felt this way? How do you think your child feels? When you when they walk into the room and you smile and you're excited to see them, how do you think that makes them feel? If you want to actually change the outcome, you have to recognize the pattern. This is the closure house where we don't shrink to stay connected.